Galveston, Texas, never slept peacefully. The port city with a population of 47,000 lived by its own rules. Oil money, tourist dollars, and shadows of the past mingled here. Detective Gabriella Mitchell knew every street in this city, every dark alley, and every family that hid its secrets behind the snow-white facades of Victorian houses. At 42, Gabriella looked tired. 15 years of working for the Galveston Police Department had left their mark. Deep wrinkles around her eyes, gray strands in her chestnut hair, and a habit of clenching her jaw when things went wrong. And lately, almost everything had been going wrong. Her marriage to District Attorney Felix Mitchell was falling apart. They had stopped talking to each other about anything important 2 years ago, when Felix got a promotion and started spending more and more time at the office. Their house in the historic East End neighborhood had become like a museum, beautiful but cold, where two people existed in parallel, avoiding serious conversations. Monday, May 15th began as usual. A call from dispatch at 6:47 a.m. woke Gabriella from a restless sleep. "We have a problem at Murdoch's Pier," Sergeant Thompson reported. "A 17-year-old boy is threatening to jump. His parents are on their way." Gabriella knew who it was before she saw the familiar figure at the edge of the pier. Jacob Harrison, son of Galveston County Sheriff Gustav Harrison, was drawing police attention for the third time in 2 months. The boy sat with his legs dangling off the wooden deck, staring at the murky waters of the bay. "Jake?" Gabriella called cautiously, approaching slowly. "What's going on, son?" The teenager turned around. His face was swollen from crying, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. At 17, Jacob already had a reputation as a difficult child, fighting at school, experimenting with alcohol, constant conflicts with his father. "Detective Mitchell?" he asked in surprise. "Where's my father?" "He's on his way. But for now, I'm here." Gabriella sat down next to him at a safe distance. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Jacob laughed bitterly. "Anne complained to my father again. She says I don't respect her, that I behave like a savage. And of course, he took her side. Anne Harrison was the sheriff's second wife, a psychotherapist who had married Gustav 3 years ago. Her relationship with her stepson was clearly not going well. "You know, Jake," Gabriella said quietly, "sometimes adults make mistakes too. Your father loves you, but he's human, and people don't always know how to show their love properly." Something in her voice caught the teenager's attention. He looked at her intently. Perhaps for the first time in all their few encounters, he really saw her. "Do you have children?" he asked. The question hit harder than Gabriella had expected. No, it didn't work out. They sat in silence until Sheriff Gustav Harrison arrived. The man looked exhausted. Work, family problems, and his son's constant antics were clearly taking their toll on him. At 52, he was still an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with graying dark hair and tired but attentive eyes. "Jacob, get in the car immediately," he ordered, without even thanking Gabriella. "Gustav," the detective stopped him. "Maybe we should talk to him? Find out what's going on?" The sheriff stopped and turned around. "Gabriella, I appreciate your help, but this is a family matter. My son is going through a difficult period. I think he just wants to be heard," she ventured cautiously. Gustav looked at his son, who was sulking as he walked toward the police car, then at Gabriella. "Maybe you're right. But I don't know how to talk to him. After the divorce, after Anne came along, everything got more complicated." At that moment, Gabriella felt something strange, a desire to help not only the teenager, but also his father. The family was clearly falling apart, and she, having gone through a family crisis herself, understood the pain. "If you want, I can try to talk to Jacob," she offered. "Sometimes it's easier for teenagers to open up to an outside adult." Gustav hesitated, but fatigue got the better of him. "Be careful, Gabriella. My son is not as simple as he seems." A week after the incident at the pier, Gabriella received a text message from an unknown number. "This is Jake. Dad gave me your number. Can we talk?" She hesitated for a few minutes, staring at her phone screen. Professionally, it was borderline acceptable, direct communication with a minor without parental presence. But something in the teenager's desperation that she had seen on the pier made her reply, "Sure. Want to meet up?" They agreed to meet at the Sea Star Cafe on Strand Street, a public place, no ethical issues. But when Gabriella saw Jacob sitting in the far corner of the cafe with his hood up, she realized that the boy did not perceive this meeting as a formal conversation with a police officer. "Thanks for coming," he said, when she sat down across from him. "I thought you might not show up." "Why would I not show up?" Gabriella ordered a coffee and looked closely at the teenager. He didn't look any better after a week. Dark circles under his eyes, nervous movements, constantly fiddling with the sleeves of his sweatshirt. "Because I'm the sheriff's son, and you probably have more important things to do." Jacob smiled bitterly. "That's what everyone thinks." "What do you think?" she asked. The next 2 hours flew by. Jacob talked about school, where he was considered the cop's son and treated with suspicion, about his stepmother, who constantly analyzed his every word like a psychotherapist, about his father, who was too busy with work to understand his son. "You know what the worst part is?" the teenager said, leaning across the table. "Everyone thinks I should have the perfect life. My father's the sheriff, my stepmother's a doctor, we have a big house. But no one asks what it's like to live in a house where you're constantly being studied and corrected." Gabriella felt a sharp pang of recognition. Her own marriage had turned into something similar, a house where two people played roles, avoiding real emotions. "I understand," she said, more quietly than she had intended. "Sometimes it feels like you're living in a museum instead of a house." Jacob raised his head sharply. "Exactly. You really understand." Something in his gaze made Gabriella feel uneasy. Too much gratitude, too much hope in the eyes of a 17-year-old boy who, for the first time in a long time, felt that he was being heard. Over the next 2 weeks, their meetings became regular. First in a cafe, then in a park by the bay, then on a bench in the East End Historic District. Gabriella told herself she was helping a troubled teenager, that she was doing a good deed. But with each meeting, the boundaries blurred. Jacob began to share more personal experiences. He talked about how his mother left his father when he was 12, how he blamed himself for his parents' divorce, how he felt like an outsider in his father's new family. "Anne thinks she can change me," he said during one of their meetings in late May. "She tries to apply her psychological techniques to me, as if I were one of her patients." "What would you want from a family?" Gabriella asked. "Just to be accepted for who I am," he replied, and there was such pain in his voice that Gabriella's heart sank. "You know, I feel normal with you. You don't try to fix me or change me." At that moment, something changed between them. Jacob sat closer to her than usual on the bench, and when he said that, his hand touched hers. The touch was quick, almost accidental, but Gabriella felt an electric shock. "Jake," she began, but he interrupted her. "You're the only person who listens to me. Really listens." Gabriella knew she should pull away, set clear boundaries, remind him of the age difference and her professional status. But something in his sincerity, in his need for understanding, resonated with her own emotional emptiness. "I'm glad I can help," she said softly. By early June, their meetings had become daily. Jacob learned to skip school, and Gabriella found excuses to leave the station during working hours. They met in more secluded places, on an abandoned pier in the eastern part of the city, in a park where people rarely went. Their conversations became increasingly intimate. Jacob talked about his fears and dreams, and Gabriella, without realizing it, began to share her own experiences of a failed marriage, feelings of loneliness, and how tired she was of playing the role of a strong female detective. "You're not like other adults," Jacob said during one of their meetings in early June. "You're real." They sat on the old pier, watching the sunset over the bay. Jacob was close, very close, and Gabriella could feel the warmth of his body. "Jake, I think we need to talk to your father," she said, trying to bring the situation back to a reasonable level. "These meetings—" "No!" he interrupted sharply. "Please don't tell him. He won't understand. No one will understand what's between us." "Between us?" Gabriella asked, her heart beating faster. Jacob turned to her, and in his 17-year-old eyes, she saw not childish affection, but something deeper and more dangerous. "You feel it too," he said quietly. "The way we understand each other. How good we are together." Gabriella knew she should get up and leave, immediately. But she continued to sit, looking into the eyes of a teenager who saw her not as a detective, not as a middle-aged married woman, but simply as someone who understood him. "It's complicated, Jake," she whispered. "It shouldn't be hard," he replied, and his hand covered hers. This time she didn't pull away. The June heat in Galveston was relentless. The humid air of the bay mixed with the smell of oil and salt, creating an atmosphere that made you want to hide in the cool. That's why Gabriella suggested that Jacob meet her in the old warehouse district, where there were abandoned buildings with air conditioning that sometimes still worked. It was Wednesday, June 18th. Gabriella remembered the date because that was when everything changed for good. Jacob waited for her in the shade of an abandoned warehouse belonging to the Gulf Star Fishing Company. He managed to turn on the old air conditioner, and it was cool inside. They sat on old boxes that had once been used to store fishing gear. "Anne made a scene again this morning," Jacob said, but there was none of his usual bitterness in his voice. In recent weeks, he seemed more confident, less broken. "She told my father that I'm acting suspiciously. I disappear every day and don't answer questions." "What did you say?" Gabriella asked, feeling a pang of anxiety. "I said I was seeing a girl," Jacob smirked. "Technically, that's not a lie." Gabriella turned sharply toward him. "Jake, I'm not a girl. I'm a woman, 42 years old. To me, you're not just a woman." He moved closer. "You're the only person who understands me. The only one I can be myself with." The warehouse was quiet, only the hum of the air conditioner breaking the silence. Gabriella looked at Jacob and knew something was wrong, but his gaze, full of adoration and need, made her heart beat faster. "Gabriella," he said softly, calling her by her first name without formality for the first time. "I think about you all the time. You've changed my life." "Jake," she began, but he interrupted her by leaning in and touching his lips to hers. The kiss was clumsy, adolescent, but so full of passion and desperation that Gabriella forgot everything for a moment. When she came to her senses, it was too late. She had responded to the kiss. "We can't do this," she whispered, pulling away but not leaving. "Why?" Jacob asked, his hands gently holding her face. "Because I'm underage? I'll be 18 in 3 months. Because you're married? You said yourself that your marriage is dead." Every word he said hit home. Gabriella knew it was wrong on every level. Morally, professionally, legally. But at that moment, in the coolness of the abandoned warehouse, with a teenager who looked at her as if she were his salvation, logic took a back seat. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of forbidden intimacy. They met every day, and their relationship quickly crossed all boundaries. Gabriella tried to maintain at least the appearance of control, but Jacob became increasingly insistent and confident. "I love you," he said on July 2nd during one of their meetings. "And I know you love me too." Gabriella couldn't respond. She was confused by her own feelings. Her maternal instinct and desire to protect him were mixed with physical attraction and emotional attachment. Jacob needed her like no one had ever needed her before. But reality began to intrude on their secret world. The first warning sign was a phone call from Gustav. "Gabriella, can we talk?" The sheriff's voice sounded tense. "About my son." They met in his office at the end of the workday. Gustav looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, nervous movements. "I don't know what's going on with Jacob," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The last few weeks he's been like a different person. More confident, almost arrogant. He refuses to say where he spends his time." "Maybe that's a good thing?" Gabriella suggested cautiously, feeling her pulse quicken. "He's becoming more mature, more independent." "Gabriella, I know my son." Gustav leaned forward. "This isn't growing up. It's something else. Anne says his behavior has changed dramatically. He's become secretive, but at the same time smug. As if he has some secret that makes him stronger." Gabriella's heart was beating so loudly that she was sure Gustav could hear it. "Have you talked to him since the incident at the pier?" the sheriff asked. "A couple of times," she lied. "Nothing serious." Gustav looked at her intently. "Gabriella, if you know anything, Jacob is my only son. I want him to have a future, a good education, a career. He's a smart boy. He can get into a good college if he doesn't do anything stupid." "Of course, Gustav, I understand." But when Gabriella left the sheriff's office, she knew they didn't have much time left. Gustav suspected something, and sooner or later, he would find out the truth. That same night, she wrote to Jacob, "We need to talk. Tomorrow, at the usual place." The next day, Jacob came to the meeting in high spirits. "Did Dad ask about me?" he asked as soon as he saw her serious face. "Jake, we need to stop," Gabriella said without preamble. "What's happening between us is wrong. It could ruin your life and my career." The teenager's face changed instantly. Confidence gave way to panic, then anger. "You can't just walk away," he exclaimed. "You said I was special, that there was something between us." "You are special, Jake. But you are a minor, and I am a grown woman, a police detective. We can't have a future together. What if I don't care about the law?" Jacob's voice took on a hysterical tone. "What if I tell my father the truth? What if everyone finds out what you've been doing to me?" The threat hit her like a blow. Gabriella realized she was trapped. Jacob was no longer a confused teenager who needed help. He had turned into a young man who was ready to use their connection as a weapon. "Jake, please be reasonable," she pleaded. "Reasonable?" he laughed bitterly. "You taught me to feel, taught me to be strong. And now you want me to go back to being a pathetic boy who silently endures all the humiliation?" At that moment, Gabriella realized the seriousness of the situation. She hadn't just slept with a minor, she had created a monster. The teenager she had given power over an adult woman was not about to give up that power. "I can't live like this anymore," she said quietly. "And you shouldn't. You have your whole life ahead of you, college, real relationships with people your own age." "I don't need peers," Jacob replied sharply. "I need you. And if you try to leave, I'll tell everyone the truth. To my father, your husband, the entire department." Gabriella looked at the 17-year-old boy who held her life in his hands and realized she had made a mistake that could destroy everything. Gustav Harrison couldn't sleep for the third night in a row. On Thursday, July 8th, he sat in his home office, looking through family photos and trying to figure out when exactly he had lost touch with his son. An open folder with college application documents lay on the table. Jacob was supposed to submit his applications by the end of the month, but every conversation about school ended in conflict. At 2 in the morning, he heard the front door open quietly. Jacob was returning from another mysterious meeting, and Gustav decided it was time to find out the truth. "Jake," he called, stepping into the hallway. His son froze in the doorway, a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. "Where have you been?" Gustav asked, approaching him. "With friends," Jacob replied automatically. But something about his behavior seemed strange to his father. The boy was clutching the piece of paper to his chest, as if hiding something important. "What do you have in your hands?" "Nothing special." Jacob tried to walk past, but Gustav blocked his way. Show me. Dad, it's personal. Gustav snatched the piece of paper from his son's hands. It was a note written in a woman's handwriting. Jake, I can't live like this anymore. Let's meet tomorrow for the last time. We need to end things. G. The sheriff slowly looked up at his son. Who is G? Jacob paled, but his eyes hardened. The girl I'm dating. What girl writes notes by hand in the age of text messages? Gustav studied the handwriting. And why does she want to end it? Dad, it's none of your business. Anything involving my underage son is my business, Gustav exploded. Who is G? And don't lie to me, Jacob. I've been on the force long enough to recognize a lie. His son remained silent, his jaw clenched. In the silence of the night, Gustav suddenly realized that the handwriting seemed familiar. Gabriella, he whispered. Detective Mitchell. Jacob's face gave him away. Gustav felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. Tell me I'm wrong, he said quietly. Tell me it's not what I think it is. Jacob straightened up, and there was a challenge in his movement. What if it is? Gustav grabbed his son by the shoulders. Jacob, you're 17 years old. She's a grown woman, a police detective. Do you understand what that means? It means that for the first time in my life, someone sees me as more than just the sheriff's son, the teenager replied sharply. She understands me. She crossed a line, Gustav shouted. That's serious, Jacob. She could get into trouble, and you'll end up suffering too. My life was already falling apart. Jacob smiled bitterly. Until Gabriella came along. Gustav backed away, realizing the magnitude of the disaster. The scandal would destroy everything: his son's career, his college admission, the family's reputation. And Jacob still didn't realize the consequences. How long has this been going on? He asked in a trembling voice. 2 months. My God, Gustav sank into a chair. Jacob, she used you. A grown woman can't sincerely love a 17-year-old boy. But don't you dare, Jacob exploded. You don't know what's between us. She's the only one who what? Who slept with a minor, who broke the law and her oath? Father and son stared at each other, a gulf of misunderstanding between them. Gustav saw disaster. Jacob saw love. The next day, Gustav couldn't concentrate on his work. He knew he had to do something, but every option led to disaster. Arrest Gabriella. Then everything would come out, and Jacob's life would be ruined. Sweep it under the rug, but the relationship could continue, and sooner or later it would come out anyway. In the evening, he decided to talk to Gabriella directly. Gustav knew where she met his son, an abandoned warehouse in the port area. Local teenagers sometimes gathered there, and the sheriff regularly checked the area. He arrived there at 8 in the evening and saw Gabriella's car parked behind the building. Inside the warehouse, a mobile phone flashlight was shining. Gustav entered through a side door and saw them. Gabriella was sitting on an old box, Jacob standing next to her, holding her hand. They were discussing something, and even from a distance, the tension between them was palpable. Gabriella, he called. She turned abruptly, her face white with horror. Jacob instinctively stepped between his father and the woman. Dad, don't... Get in the car, Jacob, Gustav said quietly, keeping his eyes on the detective. Now. I'm not leaving Gabriella. Get in the car, the sheriff roared. Jacob hesitated, but something in his father's voice made him obey. He took one last look at Gabriella and left the warehouse. They were alone. Gustav, I can explain, Gabriella began. Explain? He said, slowly approaching her. What is there to explain? You slept with my underage son. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. Gustav's voice broke. You're a police detective, Gabriella. You're 42 years old. How could you? Gabriella lowered her head. I didn't plan it. It just happened. Jacob needed help, and I was going through a difficult period in my marriage. And that's why you decided to seduce my son? Not seduce. She raised her head sharply. There's a real connection between us, real feelings. Gustav punched the wall. Real feelings. For a 17-year-old boy? You're sick, Gabriella. You don't understand. I understand perfectly well. He moved closer. You've ruined my son's life. Jacob had everything going for him. Good grades, the chance to go to a decent college, build a career. And now he's a victim in a child molestation case. We can stop this, Gabriella said desperately. No one will find out. I wanted to end this relationship myself. It's too late. Gustav shook his head. Jacob will never be the same. He thinks he loves you. He's willing to ruin his life for you. Then what do you suggest? Gustav looked at the woman who had destroyed his only son's future. Images flashed through his mind. Jacob in handcuffs as a witness in a molestation case, newspaper headlines, shattered dreams of college, the shame that would haunt the boy for the rest of his life. You're leaving Galveston, he said quietly. You'll submit your resignation, move to another state. Forever. Gustav, I can't just... You can. And you will. Because if you don't, I'll arrest you right now. Gabriella looked at him, and he saw understanding in her eyes. She realized the game was over. Okay, she whispered. I'll leave. But Jacob will be hurt. Jacob will get over it. He's young. He'll forget. But only if you disappear from his life right now. Give me a week. No! Gustav exploded. No weeks! You disappear now. Today. Something in his voice, in his expression, made Gabriella back down. She saw something terrible in the sheriff's eyes, the desperation of a father willing to do anything to protect his son. Gustav, please be reasonable. But reason left him the moment he realized the scale of the disaster. One careless turn of Gabriella's head, one glance toward the exit where Jacob was waiting, and Gustav knew she wasn't leaving. She would fight, make excuses, maybe even try to convince Jacob to run with her. A heavy wrench lay on the shelf next to him. Gustav picked it up without even thinking. Gustav, what are you doing? Gabriella asked fearfully. Protecting my son's future. The blow was precise and powerful. Gabriella fell without making a sound. Gustav stood over the body and slowly realized what he had done. But there was no remorse, only relief. The threat to Jacob's future had been eliminated. The body was discovered the next morning by patrol officer Rodriguez. The warehouse was checked regularly, and the police detective's body could not go unnoticed. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the entire team of forensic experts was working at the crime scene. Sheriff Gustav Harrison led the investigation into the murder of Detective Gabriella Mitchell, trying to look concerned and professional. Looks like a robbery, he said to Captain Jones. Her wallet is gone. There are no signs of a struggle. Maybe she was meeting an informant here. No one noticed the sheriff's hands trembling slightly as he signed the first reports. Detective Captain Marcus Jones of the Galveston Police Department stood over Gabriella Mitchell's body and felt that something was wrong. In his 20 years on the force, he had learned to trust his intuition, and now it was screaming that the robbery theory didn't hold water. Sheriff, he said to Gustav, who was standing at the entrance to the warehouse, is the wallet really missing? Yes, it's not among her personal belongings, Gustav replied, avoiding looking at the body. Looks like a classic robbery that went wrong. But the watch is still there, noted criminalist Thompson. The gold earrings, too. What kind of robber would leave the jewelry but take the wallet? Gustav felt his shoulders tense. Maybe he got scared. Or he was on drugs and acted chaotically. Jones crouched down next to the body. The blow was delivered from behind, but Gabriella was facing the door. That means she knew the attacker, talked to him, then turned around and he struck. Those are just assumptions, Gustav said sharply. Let's focus on the facts. At that moment, Detective Robert Crane from the county department entered the warehouse. He had been called in to assist with the investigation. The murder of a police officer always required maximum effort. "Sheriff Harrison," Crane greeted him. "My condolences. I hear Detective Mitchell was a good friend of yours." "A colleague," Gustav corrected. "A good detective and colleague." Crane carefully examined the crime scene. "What was she doing here?" "Possibly meeting with an informant," Gustav replied. "Gabriella was working on several drug-related cases in the port area." "What about her family? Does her husband know about her plans for last night?" Gustav paused. "Felix said she left the house around 7 without saying where she was going." While the detectives were working at the crime scene, a drama was unfolding at the police station. Jacob Harrison sat in the hallway waiting for his father. The boy looked devastated. Red eyes, pale face, trembling hands. "Jake?" Sheriff's secretary, Mrs. Parker, approached him. "Are you okay, son?" "Gabriella is dead," the teenager whispered. "Someone killed her. Did you know Detective Mitchell?" Jacob raised his head sharply, and Mrs. Parker saw something strange in his eyes. Not just grief, but something deeper and more painful. "She helped me when I had problems." "What kind of problems, Jake?" But the teenager fell silent, staring at the floor. By noon, Detective Crane had too many questions. He decided to check the surveillance cameras within a 3-block radius of the warehouse. The port area was not heavily equipped with cameras, but there were still a few. At 2:30 p.m., he got what he was looking for. A gas station camera on the corner of Harbor Street had recorded 2 cars heading toward the warehouse at 7:47 p.m. Gabriella's gray sedan and a black police SUV. At 8:15 p.m., the SUV left. The sedan remained. Crane checked the license plates. The SUV was registered to Sheriff Gustav Harrison. "Captain Jones," he called his colleague, "I need to talk to the sheriff." Immediately, but when they arrived at Gustav's office, he wasn't there. The secretary said the sheriff had gone home to pick up his son from school and spend time with him after the tragedy. The Harrisons' house in the East End greeted them with dead silence. Crane and Jones approached the front door and heard muffled voices from inside. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you saw Gabriella last night?" It was Jacob's voice. "How do you know?" Gustav replied tensely. "Mrs. Parker said the detectives are checking the surveillance cameras. They'll find your car, won't they?" A long pause. "Jacob, son, I did it for you." Gustav's voice trembled. "She would have ruined your life. Everyone would have found out. You would have been expelled from school. You wouldn't have gotten into college. Your reputation would have been destroyed forever." "You killed her!" the teenager shouted. "I protected your future!" The detectives exchanged glances. Crane took out his phone and played the recording. "She didn't want to leave, Jake. I asked her, I begged her, but she said you had real feelings for each other. That age didn't matter. She didn't understand what she was doing to you, to our family." "I loved her," Jacob cried. "And you took her away from me. You didn't love her. You're a 17-year-old boy. You don't know what love is. She took advantage of your vulnerability, your problems. It was a crime, son." "And murder isn't a crime?" The silence was long and heavy. "I didn't plan it," Gustav finally said. "But when I saw that she wasn't going to leave, that she was going to continue ruining your life, I couldn't let that happen. You're my only son, Jacob. I've dreamed about your future since the day you were born." Crane nodded to Jones. They had heard enough. The arrest went quickly and without resistance. When the detectives entered the house, Gustav was sitting on the sofa, hugging his sobbing son. He wasn't even surprised to see the police. "Gustav Harrison," Detective Crane said, "you are under arrest on suspicion of first-degree murder of Detective Gabriella Mitchell." Gustav stood up, gently pushing Jacob away. "Take care of my son," he asked. "That's all I ask." The handcuffs clicked shut with a metallic clang. News of the Galveston County Sheriff's arrest spread throughout the city in a matter of hours. The media had a sensation. A respected sheriff had killed a police detective to cover up her relationship with his underage son. Ann Harrison picked up Jacob from the police station, pale as a ghost. The stepmother and stepson, who had never gotten along, were now left alone with the tragedy that had destroyed their family. "It's my fault," Jacob repeated in the car. "If I hadn't—" "No," Ann said firmly. "It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." But the teenager wasn't listening. The world he had lived in for the past 2 months, a world where he felt special, loved, understood, had collapsed in an instant. And with it, his trust in adults, in his family, in himself, had collapsed. A week later, the details of the case became public. The relationship between the 42-year-old detective and the sheriff's 17-year-old son shocked the conservative community of Galveston. Some accused Gabriella of molesting minors. Others accused Gustav of overreacting. Felix Mitchell, the husband of the deceased, resigned as district attorney and left town. "I didn't know about my wife's problems," he told reporters, "but that doesn't justify murder." Gustav Harrison was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the trial, he expressed no remorse for the murder, but asked the court to consider his motives, his desire to protect his son's future. "I did what any father would do," he said in his final statement. "My only life was worth my son's future." Jacob did not attend the trial. By that time, he was already in a private clinic in Dallas, undergoing therapy for post-traumatic stress and trying to piece together the fragments of his shattered life. The story of Gustav Harrison became a warning about how parental love can turn into a destructive obsession, and the desire to protect can turn into an irreparable crime. In the small town of Galveston, this tragedy changed many lives and made people think about the price of secrets and the limits of parental love.